With the release of a new Pokemon Presents a few days ago, we received a first look at the upcoming DLC for Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. The Hidden Treasure of Area Zero is a two-part expansion consisting of the Teal Mask, set to release in fall of this year, and the Indigo Disc, scheduled for winter. This is very much in line with the last generation of games, Sword and Shield, which released in November of 2019 and then later got two expansions, the Isle of Armor in June of 2020 and the Crown Tundra in November of the same year. But with the unveiling of these new expansions, a lot of people are wondering what we can actually expect to see added to the game, myself included. So hello, I'm Musi, a video game composer, and if you didn't know, I'm a very big fan of Pokemon. I've grown up with these games for most of my life, and it's no secret that Scarlet and Violet have occupied a large portion of my free time over the past few months. In this video, I'd like to discuss a few of the stray thoughts and ideas I had following the initial DLC trailers, including a number of things I think we could expect to see, and a few of my own potentially ambitious ideas. Before we start, please remember as always with these sorts of things to temper your expectations. My aim with this video is to get my own thoughts out there and hopefully spark some interesting discussion about what we'll maybe see in the coming months. Please be respectful and considerate if you have anything you'd like to share. So I think the best place to start with this video is to first take a look at what we actually know about both expansions. I'm going to try to tackle them one at a time, so let's start with the Teal Mask. According to the official Pokemon website, this expansion will see us travel to the land of Kitakami to participate in an outdoor study opportunity in partnership with another academy. Likely the Blueberry Academy, but we'll get to that later. We don't get too much detail on the actual place of Kitakami, but there are a few things we can look at. First of all, the official website states that a great mountain towers over the lands of Kitakami and people live at its base. It is a place of tranquil, natural expanses, featuring rice paddies and apple orchards. A new and different experience compared to the Paldea region. Just from this description alone, I immediately started thinking of Pokemon Legends Arceus, which features a very similar sort of rural location and aesthetic with the ancient Hisui region. This got me wondering if we can maybe expect a similar sort of aesthetic in the look of Kitakami itself, which I would personally be very excited for. We've also seen that the festival and Pokemon of this new area seem to have strong ties to the story of Momotaro, a popular Japanese folktale hero. For more information on these connections, I very strongly recommend watching Loxton's new video on the DLC, which I've linked in the description. After this one, of course. In said video, Loxton also suggests that Kitakami may be based on Majorca, one of Spain's Balearic Islands and a very popular British tourist destination. This could give us some more ideas on what we could expect to see from a geographical and visual standpoint. This brings me to my main point. One of the things I'd like to see in this first expansion is a more developed open world. The original map of Paldea was large, varied, and interesting, but it was also designed around the idea that the player would gradually receive upgrades to Koraidon or Miraidon respectively through the Titan battles, and increase their movement capabilities over the course of the game. What this ultimately meant was, while some areas do have elements of exploration exclusive to the later upgrades, most of the early portions of the map are designed around the player having quite limited movement options. This was certainly fine, and it was nice being able to revisit old areas and redevelop the way you explore them, but this new expansion is presumably being built with the base expectation that the player has all movement upgrades. I should specify that this isn't confirmed by any means, but I feel it would make the most sense as it seems that the story across these two expansions is a continuation of where we ended in the base game. The player has all movement upgrades at this point, so I think it's a reasonable assumption. Future Unscripted Musi here. So whilst editing, I did notice that the website specifies that in order to play part 1, you need to have begun the treasure hunt, and then in order to play part 2, you will need to have reached the ending. So this does bring the idea of having all movement upgrades into question, but hopefully this section should still be enjoyable regardless. Thanks! So taking that into consideration, I'd like to see this new land of Kitakami be designed with the full kit of Koraidon and Miraidon in mind. Personally, I'd love to see some more verticality within the open world design. Area Zero stood out to me in particular for having this very vertical layout, and it's one of the more entertaining areas to explore and run around in as a result. More of this in the overworld would be really great, and I can see there being much more room for interesting secrets or paths of exploration to find if the world was constructed in a similar way. The fact that the area's description makes a point of there being a great mountain towering over the village of Kitakami also seems to support this idea, so I'm hopeful that we'll see some open world design that contrasts that of Paldea and offers a more unique experience. On the topic of the open world, let's now hop over to look at the Indigo Disk. In this expansion, it's said that we will travel to the sister academy of the base game's school, known as Blueberry Academy. This place is said to have been established in recent years, unlike the Naranja/Uva Academy, which has a long and storied history. This basically says to me that whilst the school in the base game is more traditional and deeply integrated into the culture of Paldea, this new academy is more sleek and modern, likely with the technology and visuals to match. Of course, the most standout feature of this academy was shown to us in the teaser trailer. It's a seemingly man-made island built on the ocean, sort of like Sun and Moon's Aether Foundation, with the website stating that most of the school's building is under the ocean. Whilst there's no doubt that this is a really cool setting for a school academy, I think it has some people, myself included, concerned in regards to the playable space of the expansion. It seems safe to say that the Teal Mask is likely going to follow in the same or similar steps to the Sword and Shield expansions, in terms of the scale of the new area and the amount of content within it, but for the Indigo Disk it feels difficult to say the same thing. Unless this academy structure is actually an extremely large and sprawling environment, I can't imagine that we'll be getting a similar sort of new area here. So what can we expect to see? Well, taking another look at the website, it states that in this expansion, you will take part in classes, interact with the local students, and experience school life in this unusual academy. For a lot of people, this should sound very familiar, as the school academy in the base game featured a very similar sort of thing in the form of optional side content. Here, you could attend a variety of different classes, many of which explained a lot of the game's core mechanics, as well as providing lots of lore and story about the region and its history. I personally found these classes to be quite fun and interesting, if a little tedious. I thought it was a really interesting take on the classic trainer school building from almost every Pokemon game, a usually optional area that holds a few battles, some items, and lots of information for newer players. Here, it was significantly expanded and given a lot more life. However, it's worth noting that the school wasn't exactly explorable beyond the large entrance hall and several isolated rooms. This was acceptable, as again, this was optional side content, so having a completely fleshed out school is maybe a little unreasonable. Here, however, it sounds like the academy is going to be the main area of this expansion, which leads me to believe that we're going to get a more developed version of this concept. This might mean more fleshed out classes with expanded content, as well as a fully explorable school with more things to do. I think this could work quite well, and I'd be interested to see how Game Freak expands on what we've seen so far. It does still feel a little lacking in comparison to the Teal Mask, however, so allow me to break into optimistic speculation about a few ideas I had on what else we could maybe see. One thought is that perhaps the academy building we saw in the trailer is less of a single building and more of a mini town or city. It does appear quite sizable from what we were able to see, and it would also make much more sense for an isolated settlement on the water to have more to it than just a school. Things like shops, houses, and general city establishments would likely need to be here in order for it to work as an academy location, which got me thinking about the base game's main city of Mesagoza. This was easily the largest city in the game, so much so that it warranted its own unique loading zone. And more importantly, it's where the game's academy is located. This got me wondering if maybe this new location in the expansion could be a sort of Mesagoza equivalent, a sort of technological underwater city built around the academy. I think this is a really cool idea and would bring up the content of this expansion to a similar level of the Teal Mask, but I do wonder if it's a bit overambitious. So, as an alternative idea, I want to turn our focus to the name of this entire DLC as a whole, The Secrets of Area Zero. Based on what we've seen so far, I think it's reasonable to believe that the first expansion is going to be a bit more focused on things like Kitakami, the new characters and Pokemon of this expansion, as well as maybe some of the early story ideas for the entirety of the DLC. With this in mind, it follows that the second expansion is going to hold the larger revelations of the story, as well as tying everything together and providing a satisfying conclusion. Now, when we consider that the first expansion seems to be focusing the bulk of its content on an external area that is separate from the rest of the game, I think the absence of an equally large area in the second expansion might suggest that a significant portion of its contents will actually be focused on Paldea instead. Then, with a title like The Secrets of Area Zero, it seems reasonable to assume that we will be venturing back into Area Zero, potentially exploring some new sections of the area and uncovering things that were previously inaccessible in the base game. Thus, it makes sense for most of this to happen in the second expansion rather than the first, which already has a significant portion of its potential content already laid out. Another point in support of this is the fact that the expansion itself is titled The Indigo Disk. a very explicit reference to the mystery disc Pokemon described in the Scarlet and Violet book. We now assume this to be Terapagos, the legendary mascot of this expansion. Its design has very clear ties to terrestrialization, with its crystallized, disc-shaped shell containing the icons of every single Pokemon type. It's also very explicitly in the name. Thus, it is likely very closely related to the mysteries of Area Zero, including the terrestrialization phenomenon, paradox Pokemon, and the time machine they seem to come from. With all of this in mind, consider the fact that, whilst the name of the first expansion is in clear reference to these new Pokemon of Kitakami, the name of the second expansion seemingly has no ties to the Blueberry Academy, beyond the indigo color potentially being in reference to it. This leads me to assume that the focus of this expansion will instead be on Area Zero, which supports my previous points. I can certainly see this being a possibility, and I would love to be able to explore the depths of Area Zero in more detail. Returning to Blueberry Academy, however, I don't think I was alone in thinking that what we saw in the trailer was going to be some sort of Battle Frontier equivalent for Scarlet and Violet. If you weren't aware, the Battle Frontier was a post-game location first introduced in Pokemon Emerald, featuring several battle facilities with different functions. This provided a significant amount of post-game content and would return in future games in a variety of forms and scales, the most recent of which being the Battle Tower in Sword and Shield. Now, Scarlet and Violet currently do not have anything like this. In fact, Scarlet and Violet are quite unusual for not even including the option to re-challenge the Elite Four, something that was a staple of previous games. This often involved facing off against a higher level variant of the existing Elite Four, sometimes with changes to their teams, and was another significant source of post-game content. The closest thing we get to this in Scarlet and Violet at the moment is the Academy Ace tournament, where you can fight against 4 randomly selected trainers from the school and its staff. This does mean that Hassel and Geeta are technically rechallengeable, but even then, it's completely up to chance if you will even fight them at all, so it's hardly a consistent option. So, knowing all of that, let's look again at the official website. Here, it states that the curriculum of Blueberry Academy puts a particular emphasis on Pokemon battling. This suggests to me that the Academy could serve as some sort of battle facility, where players will be able to challenge different trainers and also take on a variety of different styles of play, like tournaments and the like. Furthermore, considering that the base game established Paldea's Pokemon League as a sort of established organisation, I'd be very surprised if they weren't involved in the activities of this academy as well, particularly as it's said to be the sister academy of Naranja/Uva. Having a sort of battle location like this could also be a means of addressing one of the big problems in the base game, being that Terra Shards are considerably awkward and time-consuming to collect. The inconsistency of raids, combined with the ludicrous cost for changing just a single Pokemon's Terra type, means that it's exceedingly difficult at the moment for the average player to fully engage in the terrestrialization system. A battle facility like this could offer a new means of earning Terra Shards in a much more efficient way, which could fix this issue. The same could potentially be said for Herba Mystica, as well as other useful items like XP candies, ability patches and capsules, and the like. Overall, I think this paints a really good picture for the contents of the second expansion, a battle facility / academy for learning and battling, and a deep dive back into the depths of Area Zero. This, to me, feels like a good amount of content, and is more in line with my expectations for the Teal Mask, just in a different way. On the topic of terrestrialization, another thing I felt the base game lacked was variety and depth when it came to the application of this mechanic. For those unaware, terrestrialization is Scarlet and Violet's new battle mechanic. Every Pokemon you catch has an associated Terra type that it can turn itself into during battle, covering itself in a crystallized layer and getting a cute little hat to represent whatever type it's turned into. When terrestrialized, the type of the Pokemon changes so that it is defensively considered this type, it is offensively considered all of these types. This means that same type attack bonus, or stab, is applied to moves of all of these types, but when it comes to taking damage, type effectiveness only considers this one. Furthermore, if you terrestrialize into one of your existing types, the stab bonus given by your terrestrialized type is now raised to 2 rather than 1.5. This all culminates in a mechanic that I feel is one of the coolest and most inventive that we've seen from Pokemon in a while. Being able to transform any Pokemon into any type offers such a wide and virtually limitless number of creative ways to take advantage of different Pokemon, from eliminating weaknesses to creating new strengths. It's because of all of this that I think it's such a shame that this mechanic was used so plainly throughout the whole game. When you fight the first few gym leaders and get to see them transform Pokemon that usually wouldn't fit into their specialized type into said type, It's a fun little surprise that makes the battle a bit more interesting. However, you quickly come to realize that every single gym leader does this exact same thing with their last Pokemon every single time. This becomes less of a novel surprise and more of a predictable pattern you can abuse as the game progresses, removing any sense of depth the battle might have had. Outside of this, Terastallization tends to only really be used in the last way that I detailed, terastallizing into the existing type of a Pokemon to make that type stronger. This is once again really uninteresting, and I'll note again that it's always the last Pokemon on an opponent's team that does this. Even Champion Geeta terastallizes her last Pokemon, Glimmora, into a rock type, which it already is. This battle could have been so much more interesting and potentially challenging if she just used terastallization in a more interesting way. Thus, one of my biggest hopes for these two expansions is that we get to see opponents making more creative use of terastallization. Things like having a Pokemon that is weak to something like Ghost type, transforming into Normal type to gain an immunity instead, or making use of something like Ice type to gain the defense boosts of Snow. There are so many ways that battles could be made significantly more interesting just with little changes like these. Of course, recent Pokemon games are notorious for not being particularly challenging, but we have had some developments in recent years with more interesting and challenging opponents, like the final boss of Legends Arceus for example. Considering that the second expansion is explicitly battle focused, it is my hope that we will see more interesting applications of this mechanic within whatever battles this expansion will include. Terastallization is currently very underrepresented within the base game, and it would be nice to see that change. For my last point, it would be silly not to talk about new Pokemon in a video about Pokemon. So far, we've been shown a total of 5 new Pokemon exclusive to these expansions. The Teal Mask will introduce the legendary Ogerpon, as well as 3 others known as Okidogi, Munkidori, and Fezandipiti, and the Indigo Disc will introduce the aforementioned Terapagos. Beyond this, however, we have no indication as to whether or not we will be seeing more new Pokemon in these expansions. We could look at the expansions for Sword and Shield as a reference point. These expansions added a variety of new Pokemon, with almost all of them being new legendaries. The only exceptions to this were the new Gigantamax forms and the Galarian Slowpoke line, which might suggest that we'll be getting another regional variant or convergent species. Beyond that though, it may just be these newly revealed legendaries, as well as maybe 1 or 2 that we've yet to see, that will be added. One key thing that I've neglected to mention so far though, regards the other reveal we got for Scarlet and Violet during the Pokemon Presents event. This came in the form of 2 new Paradox Pokemon, the prehistoric Walking Wake, a Paradox Suicune, and the futuristic Iron Leaves, a Paradox Virizion. Whilst these new reveals may have seemed out of the blue for some people, these Pokemon had already been teased in the base game. We can see this through the imagined Pokemon pages in both the Scarlet and Violet books, which can both be found in the entrance hall of the Academy. These pages depict Pokemon envisioned by an artist that represent Suicune and Virizion in the form of sketches, depicting them with these paradox-looking forms. However, what many people have noticed is that these depictions are drastically different to the final versions we received this week. It doesn't take a keen eye to compare these designs and see the obvious differences. A lot of people have wondered why this is the case, and I believe the answer can be found in these sketches themselves. If we take a closer look at both drawings, we can see that they both seem to pull from all 3 members of their respective trios, rather than just Suicune and Virizion. This has led many to wonder if we might be getting paradox versions of these other seemingly missing pieces in the future. I, for one, think this would make a lot of sense. Not only is the focus of these expansions on the secrets of Area Zero, which obviously could mean Paradox Pokemon, but the release of these Pokemon could also line up very nicely with the release of the 2 expansions. Much like how Walking Wake and Iron Leaves were released at the same time, we could see the same thing happen with the 2 new forms, one future and one past, with the release of the Teal Mask, and then again with the Indigo Disc, completing the respective trios. It's unclear at this point how likely this is to happen, but I feel it would make a lot of sense to do something like this to build a bit more hype around the respective release windows for both expansions. Beyond this though, it's hard to say if we'll be seeing much more in terms of new Pokemon. Personally, I'd like to see some more regional forms, and also maybe some additional evolutions to Pokemon like Scovillain, which I personally felt was a little undeveloped. That just about wraps up all of the main thoughts I have on this upcoming DLC. Thank you all so much for listening, and I hope at least some of my ramblings were of interest. I'm very excited to see what there is to come in these new expansions, and I hope many of you are as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments about what you personally are anticipating, as well as what you would love to see for these new expansions. If you weren't aware, this is actually my second channel. My main channel, MusieVGM, is where I publish the majority of my work, which includes a variety of original music and the occasional cover of other music, typically tracks from video games. If any of that is of interest to you, please consider subscribing to that channel, as it really helps me grow and get more of my work out there. Conversely, if you're interested in seeing more of this type of video content, as well as any other random ideas or concepts I have that don't quite fit my main channel, consider subscribing here. I have plans in the near future to try my hand at a few video essays, so if that sounds like something you'd be into, it'll most likely show up here. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll hopefully see you at some point in the future. Bye bye!